I got 9 o'clock on my time. Why is my view so weird? Hmm. Mike, can you hear me?
I gotcha.
All right. Good morning. Happy Friday.
Same to you.
Are
It's
you
a
still
beautiful
in the
day.
same mode that I am? Like, what the hell day is it?
Yeah, it gets that way.
Man, it is crazy. I guess I'm sharing something. Huh. Somebody hit a button somewhere. Standard view? No. Jimmy, help. Doesn't matter. Um, Side by side speaker, side by side gallery. Huh. Anyway, Master the Contract Fridays is kind of like real world real estate because these are issues that we come across that if we can help somebody learn from and they had a problem, then chances are you could have that same problem. So if you can learn from what somebody else does, um, then when that situation comes up, you'll have experience and not have to fall in the same trap, right? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We got three issues we're going to get through today. Well, I got 8 chats in there already. Beautiful morning, the Florida Keys. Yes, beautiful this morning. Mike, where are you on the Emerald Coast?
I was putting that in the message now. So
That's
basically anywhere from Navarre to Panama City Beach, in that range. So it's about a 100-mile stretch here on the coast.
Yeah, I love Rosemary Beach is my favorite spot
Oh yeah.
on 38. That is just what is it like $2,000 a foot now?
It's up there. Yeah, I just sold a 2-bedroom flat up there last month. Gorgeous, gorgeous piece of property. They're just gutting it and redoing the whole thing. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's gonna rent like crazy.
Nice. Okay. So let's let you go first because you got a real life lesson of something that happened that you trusted somebody, right? Talk about how you met
Absolutely.
them, you trusted them, and then their broker got changed and the broker kind of screwed you on it, which is kind of a shitty thing to do, but there are things we could have done to keep that from happening.
You are correct. And I'm a little bit to blame as well. There's always blame on both sides. So basically, about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine from Texas, we moved here from Texas in 2015. So had a good network back there, even though I didn't do real estate, but they know I do it now. So they called me from Texas and said, hey, we want a place in the Keys and we're going to come down in December and take a look. Who do you know? And, lo and behold, I'd just been to Florida 21. One of the keynote speakers was a top agent down in the Keys. So I said, hey, that's the guy. Picked up the phone, called him. Love to have your referral. Sure, Mike, send everything over. I filled out the referral form with my friend's name and the 25% and put a 1 year referral on it. And so sent everything to them. Everything was signed and returned. Everything looked great. I talked to the sellers, the buyers. They went down there and looked. They couldn't find anything in their 1 million to 1.2 million that they wanted. So they said, we upped it to 2 million. We're building a new house and it's going to take about, 9 months. So I still figured, we're fine. So at that time they went under contract. Then I kept up with the agent. How's the build going? I was always checking in. And here's where I think I made my first mistake. I never got a copy. I didn't ask for a copy of that contract. And I think that's where I made one of my mistakes. And, that would have never happened with BE3 because our back office is so sharp. They would have said, hey, Mike, great referral. Send me the contract so we know when you're under contract and what's going on with this thing. We can track it.
Well, that's
But
only if the agent shares with relocation and you involve the process. If you involve Ashley in the referral, she's got a back office software system that will remind her to make the follow-up calls for you.
And that's correct. So the brokerage I was with was a C21, but I did not go through their referral company because it was out of Connecticut. Anyway, so I would definitely say that's probably a mistake, and you want to use our referral network because they can track everything. So anyway, we went under contract. I kept emailing the agent, kept talking to the buyers, and it came down to, hey, we're going to close in July. Well, that didn't happen. Hey, we're going to close in August. And so I said, finally, we're going to close. And even had one of our regional presidents Tracy, she drove by the house to make sure it was, I said, I don't know. I've never seen the house. And she drove by, took pictures, sent it to me and said, looks finished to me. So I texted the agent and I emailed the agent constantly. And I said, hey, he said, yeah, we're closing on the 28th. I said, fantastic. He said, send me the referral agreement. I can't find it. So I sent everything to him along with a series of emails that we had back and forth about the property and that, hey, all this, what was going on with it. And next thing you know, it closes. Crickets. I waited about a week, called the brokerage, voicemail. Emailed the brokerage. So finally, I emailed a little higher up in there because they're a big brokerage and they have like a central area on the East Coast. So I emailed up to one of the presidents. Then I finally got a call and he goes, I don't have your referral. I said, well, your agent does. And then he says, okay, well, send it to me. And then I sent it to him. He goes, well, your referral expired. I said, it's expired now, but when we went under contract, it was not expired at that time. And he said, my signature is not on this. This is a previous broker. And I said, okay, but it's still your brokerage. He goes, no, I'm not going to honor this, And I said, well, will you talk to your agent? He knows I'm the procuring cause for his buyer. He knows I gave him the buyer. I said, I'll send you all the emails. No, we're not going to honor it. This is expired. And again, it's just, it was a comedy of errors. And one of the things that I did, like I said originally, is I put the name of my friend on the referral at the very first time. And I didn't know that she was going with her boss and the boss was buying the property. But once I found that out, I emailed him and said, hey, do we need to change the name on their referral to match that? And his response was, no, we're fine. So I have all this stuff from the agent. And needless to say, I did not get that $12,000 referral.
Which sucks, right? All right. So the lessons we talked about yesterday were, one, if you know it's a subordinate to the purchaser who's going to be looking, say John Smith and or anybody affiliated with John Smith. You could say something like that in a referral line. So you don't pinpoint yourself into one person, right? But what happened was really shitty. I will promise you guys, if you honor a referral fee, I will honor the referral fee, right? If you sign it, I'm going to honor it, right? Some brokers play that game like this guy did. Well, I didn't sign this one. It was a previous broker. I'm sorry. It's not the broker that's responsible. It's the brokerage that's responsible, right? I am
Correct.
the broker for Beggins Enterprises, but Beggins Enterprises is the broker, right? So Century 21 Circle, and I'll call them out. Century 21 Circle in this case was the broker that received it. Now, just because they changed managing brokers doesn't matter. The brokerage still owed that referral fee. But it just became, it's almost not worth fighting over $12,000. And $12,000 probably is worth fighting over. But
well, yeah, and like I said, I reached out to Florida Realtors Hotline, the lawyer hotline, and they called back and he said, I gave him all the information. He said, well, you're right. And he said, you probably do have a case. He said, it's going to be a little bit difficult to prove. He said, it's going to cost you a lot of money and retainers and fees and all this. And at that point, I was just like, what comes around goes around. When you treat people a certain way, it'll come back to you. So I said, it'll all work out. It'll happen with him.
all right. So the takeaway from Master the Contract Friday is do your best to identify the referred party. And, the other thing that's true in this case that they ignored is our commission is due at the time of contract, not at the time of closing. So theoretically, to reverse the tables on them, if their listing agreement was for a year and the house took a year and a half to build, sorry, the listing agreement is not valid anymore. Bullshit. Because our contract gets extended during the contract period. And that's all in writing in our contract, which is why we like to use Florida bar forms. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's lesson number one, right? And that's a 12,000. That's a bigger commission than most of our commissions. That referral commission could be bigger than a real commission.
It was exciting for about 12 months.
Right. But the cool thing is you met the guy and the agent didn't screw you, his broker did.
Well,
he didn't
and I will
stand
tell
up
you,
for you.
he stopped returning my calls and emails and texts when this happened, when this went down after I sent him everything. And even afterwards, I said, "Hey, did we close?" And he wouldn't answer. He hasn't responded. And I'm sure that came from the broker. And I told the broker, I said, "If you'll just talk to your agent, he knows where I have all the documentation. I'm sorry, this is expired. My signature's not on it. We're not honoring it. Everybody's been paid too late."
Terrible. All right.
Yeah.
So Tracy says, yes, every referral should be, I copy Ashley on everything I sign. Every referral group, you guys send it to me to sign sometimes, and I copy her.
Yeah.
Because she puts it into broker metro or broker, whatever it's called, the back office, relocation. And then that
Well, like
tracks
I
it and
said,
sets
I
reminders
feel
for
like it
Bob.
would have never happened here. Because of all our checks and balances, it's a whole different system what I came from. So, live and learn.
Okay, that was referral lesson. Number two, this one's going to be interesting. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it because, pardon my French, but shit happens, right? I personally like the regular contract, not the as is, but you got to be extra diligent with the regular contract. And because you don't have a universal right to cancel. So here's the situation. Yes, Karma's a bitch. We had an agent named Karma too. So I used to say that a lot when she was online. Our buyer's agent has a buyer who went to contract on the listing. They did their home and it was a regular contract. They had $1,500 in repair limits for the three areas: permits, general maintenance, and what is and whatever the third one is, permits. So they did their inspections. The inspection came back, and there was rodents in the attic. Right? And what do rodents do in the attic? They party it up. They're drinking, they're peeing, they're pooping, they're doing all that shit. And that is really kind of sickening. It's not healthy, it's bad. And where does that stuff sit? In the insulation, right? So the buyer says, hey, I want you to fix the rat infestation. And the seller and their agent looked at the contract, and nowhere in the contract is silent on, and I'm going to show you in a minute, it's silent on rodents. So Kathleen got involved, and I'm going to share my screen. And found Berlin Patent is a Sarasota law firm, and they put this article out. And it says the buyer's home inspection performed on the property, and the inspection reveals rats in the attic. This is our situation. It's not our situation, but it's just like ours. Now the buyer wants to know whether the seller is responsible for remediation. Basically depends on whether the rats have done structural damage to the property. So that means they got through a soffit, they got through an eave, they got through something. So the seller was responsible for blocking that off and terminating. There were rat traps up there and all kinds of stuff. The ceiling, roof, exterior and interior walls, doors, windows, and foundations have been free from leaks, water damage, or structural damage. Consequently, if the rats have eaten their way through the soffit to gain entry into the house, the seller has to repair the damage and address the cause, which is the rat infestation. In contrast, if the rats have not done any structural damage to the house, the FLARBAR 2 is silent with regards to the rat issue. The seller is also expected to treat the property for live infestation of WDO, which includes arthropod plant life, including termites, power post beetles, old house borers, and wood decaying fungi. Although the contract is silent as to rats, bats, squirrels, or any other type of rodent or mammal, the seller still has a duty to disclose to the buyer the known latent defect. Now, in this case, the seller knew there were rats up there because they had rat traps, and it was not disclosed. So that's an issue. In summary, if you have a rat or any other type of rodent or mammal problem with the property, there has to be structural damage to the property to be addressed within the FLARBAR contract. So the seller rather than being decent, the seller decided to patch the holes in the soffit or replace the soffit, for $100 problem, and said, hey, buyer, boom, So we said, this isn't right. We argued the point, and the listing agent came back and said, sorry, seller's not going to pay. And if you don't close, we're going to keep your deposit. How much was the deposit? $50,000,
Ooh.
which is a good idea to hold a contract together, right?
Mhm.
But it's not going to cost $50,000 to pull that insulation out and put new insulation in. So they'd be kind of foolish to lose 50 grand when they could probably solve the problem for 5 or 6 to suck out the old insulation and put in new. I don't know what that would really cost, but I don't think it would be 50,000 bucks. Right. So then we went through a whole bunch of other instances. And this is for my benefit to you guys. No wood or wiring damage, but the insulation is very soiled. Pictures and quote was to replace it in treatment. They also didn't disclose this in the seller's disclosure. That's a problem. Traps were already in the attic and they were obviously aware. I don't know. I've had rats before in my other homes. And when you catch a rat in a trap and you don't know about it, what happens?
Stench.
Oh my God, it
Smell it.
stinks to high
Ooh.
heaven, right? And Kathleen went through the contract and said general property repair, and totally it's silent on the issue of rats and rodents. But we have these problems in Florida, especially if you have trees near your roof, because the rats or the rodents can run along the trees and jump on your roof and get it. That's why they put screen mesh over the vents,
Mhm.
so rodents don't get in through those areas. I'm trying to find my emails because the questions came across to me and they were very vague. It says, what do we do? And I said, well, question number one, I'm not copied on either replies, so they're not there, right? But that's another thing, guys. Email etiquette. When you've got a string of emails, keep the string going so everybody's included on every message. So I wrote back, question number one, is this an as-is contract or a regular contract? If it was as-is, the buyer could say, I'm out of here unless you fix the insulation problem. That would have been solved. But this is a $1,500 limit, and there's nothing to the contract that says the seller has to replace the insulation. It says they have to fix the structural damage where the rats came in. And this puts an agent in a bad situation, right? Because what could we have? Well, first of all, should we have done anything to protect them? No, it's a highly unusual occasion. Most of the time, an as-is contract would have given the right to walk away. But that repair limit was pretty low for $1,500 to force the seller to do something. But once again, in this case, the contract was silent to the issue of rat infestation. It doesn't address it. So, I mean, this is where your knowledge of this now is going to make you a better agent if you're dealing with older homes or have other issues, right? And I don't know what I would do. You're not going to write into the contract. Buyer and seller agree if there's rat infestation discovered, seller will handle the replacement of the insulation and removal of rodents and fixing of structural damage. You're not going to write that in every contract, for goodness sakes. You'd look like a moron, right? And so the agent wrote back, it was a regular contract. And then I wrote back questions 2, 3, and 4 was, what are the repair limits? Right? Because I want to see where that was. And I just don't have an answer. I texted Kathleen this morning, but I didn't get to her. I think she's run out to Longboat Key again. It was just a mess. So what do you do in a situation like that? It's like a guess what, now what? I don't know. In my position, this buyer should close because the risk of losing 50 grand is a lot greater than the cost of changing out the insulation. I know it's pretty cheap to blow insulation in. I don't know how expensive it is to pull it out. I know it's messy, but I assume they put a trash bag over the attic opening and just rake it all in. And somebody's got to go up there with a biohazard mask and all that other crap. So it's probably a little more expensive than I'm thinking it is, but it's certainly not $50,000. So I thought that was a good one. And so that's number 2. Number 3, and you had some comments on this too. You had a situation where there was an open house. Why don't you
Yes.
tell that story and then I'll close it up with.
Okay, so one of the things I've been recommending to my agents here on the Emerald Coast is, they're like, how do I get business? What I said, well, number one, and then Jeff's talked about this, Jared James talked about this. is open houses. So we've actually had quite a lot of luck lately with open houses, at least getting, buyers through, which for a while there, it was like pulling teeth to get somebody to show up. But I've got one, it's a waterfront townhome right
Keep
by
going.
Marina.
I'll be back in 30 seconds. I got to check
Yeah.
my dog.
So there's a lot of, track activity going back and forth through that marina, and we put our open house sign right by it, and people come in left and right. So we have an agent hosting an open house. Buyers are coming in like crazy. Now, some are represented, some are not. So what we're running into is one of our agents that set the open house has, introduced herself to all these people. She gets and she says, I'll continue to send you information if you like. And they're like, sure, we signed up, send us more information, send us what else is in this neighborhood. So she's sending them properties. And then the husband calls and says, we love what you're doing. We'd love to go see this house. When can we line it up? And she's like, well, do you have a buyer's disclosure, a buyer brokerage agreement? And he said, my wife signed one with another agent. So I think we have to look a little deeper to see, is it really a BBA or is it a showing agreement or what is it? So we need to find that out, number one. Number two, since they're already working with another and they've signed a BBA, you really can't go show them houses. And that's kind of what I've explained to her. I said, it'd be wasting your time, and I don't think you can legally, they've got that agreement with that broker. Now, what they could do is they could cancel that, and that's totally up to them. So I gave her, Section 9 is where you talk about cancellations and all that. So I said, make sure that they get a copy of that broker agreement and check it out. And if they can cancel and they want to work with you like they're saying, then, as long as that agent or brokerage hasn't shown the house that you're showing them, and they have that procuring cause, so you should be fine. So it's just, there's a lot of steps you have to go to show people now, which is, it's good and it's bad, because that buyer can be yours now with that agreement. It's the same thing that they're running into, but you still need to work and keep them happy, because apparently their current brokerage is that the wife signed with, they're not happy with at all. They're not sending them stuff. They're not doing anything. And she wants their business. So she's hustling.
So I read into that this morning. So you have paragraph, this is the EBBA,
Yes.
the exclusive buyer broker agreement. And there's a protection period. And it says the consumer will compensate the broker. The consumer will compensate their broker, this buyer broker agreement, if within 45 days, that's the pre-selected termination period, right? You can make it longer or shorter.
Right.
If consumer contracts to acquire any property which was called to consumer's attention by the broker or any other person found by the consumer during the term of this agreement. So anytime, if you found anything while we're listed, you're protected. Consumer's obligation to pay broker's fee ceases upon consumer entering into a good faith exclusive buyer broker with another broker after the termination date. So I'm thinking, all right. So 45 days are up, the buyer broker agreement's up. Their obligation to pay to their broker ceases after the termination date. Okay. But that's not the case you're talking about here. They want to cancel.
Yes.
So, and then you read paragraph 9, which is conditional termination. At consumer's request, broker may agree to conditionally terminate this agreement. If broker agrees to a conditional termination of the agreement, consumer must enter into a written agreement to this effect and pay a cancellation fee. Broker may void the conditional termination, and consumer will pay the fee stated above in compensation paragraph, less the cancellation fee, if from the early termination date to the termination date plus the protection period, if applicable, consumer contracts to acquire any property which, prior to the early termination date, was found by consumer or called to consumer's attention by broker at any point. So if the contract dies, you can show them whatever the hell you want.
Right.
If the contract is terminated early, they're protected on the houses they showed while they were listed. That's a huge difference. So in your case, your agents in the open house, they want to terminate their agreement. We kind of owe it to the buyer to tell them, you need to make sure you cancel, because if you sign it with me, you're going to owe 2 commissions.
Yeah.
And we don't want that to happen. And that's just not fair. Right. So I don't know what agreement they had. You'd have to get into the middle of it, but think worst case, it's an EBBA. And if they're canceling early, you can't show. So you're going to have to find out what houses they were shown and avoid them. because you can't really do it, or you can do it, you just won't get paid.
Yeah, and that's the bad part. Yeah, exactly.
So
To me, the confusing thing is the very last sentence in number 9, after it says was found by consumer or called to consumer's attention by broker or any other person. Does that mean our agent sent them this property?
their daughter found the house and said, "Hey, mom, go look at this," because their contract says if you buy anything during this period of time in this area, you are covered.
Okay.
So yeah, it was any other person. It's just like if a FISBO reached out to them, that's during that period, because if they buy anything, that's why the BBA, the EBBA, is so powerful. And I really like it. And from what I see, you guys are doing a really good job of getting them signed. Once again, we're not going to be pricks if it comes to a problem, but you guys are so good at what you do, we're not having any problems so far. It's going to be very, very interesting. So I wrote down, don't show homes that were previously seen unless you know it died a natural death and then you signed up a new agreement. Make
Yeah,
sure you
and I
check.
think in this case, she's showing them, she sent them a property that their agent has not sent them. And they're like, oh, we like that one.
Good. They're free to show it.
Yeah.
Open houses are very good. The last point, that was 3. The last one I was going to hit it again real quick, because what I'm hearing from the field, and of course I'm not in the field, but I talk to agents all day long. It's like pulling teeth to get the listing agent to send you a compensation agreement, which I don't understand why. It's such a professional thing to do, right? Have the seller sign a compensation agreement, have it easily accessible to, to email out, and then you have that problem. And then once you have the compensation agreement, you don't need anything else, because the compensation agreement is a written agreement between either the seller and our company as the buyer's broker, or the seller's broker and us. So we don't need anything if they play the game the way it was designed. But FAR realized it's not being played the way it was designed. So they gave us 2 options to include compensation in the contract itself. Because remember, the contracts between the buyer and the seller, and the brokerages don't really belong. But under the new way this settlement act works, the buyer's responsible for their agent, the seller's responsible for their agent. So you can insert the brokerage into the contract if it's for the buyer or the seller's benefit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if the buyer makes a request to their offer, hey, seller, I want you to pay my agent, it would be no different than seller, I want you to pay my closing cost. Seller, I want you to pay for my interest rate buy down, right? It's a request of the buyer to the seller, right? So in that case, we have, what's this one? Oh, that's GG. I want FF. FF. Oh no, let's do GG first. So GG is the seller's agreement with respect to buyer's broker compensation. Now, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your job has become one step further now. You really need to communicate with the listing agent somehow so you can fill this form out properly. Because you have to know this contract is a contingent upon check 1, seller's broker and buyer's broker, or seller and buyer's broker. We have to have one of those checked, and we don't know which one to check unless we talk to the agent. Now, they could text you and say it's seller's broker to buyer's broker, and that would be fine. But since you didn't get the showing compensation agreement, you don't know what to check here. So if you're going to use FF, if they didn't give you a compensation agreement, you want to put it into the contract. Agents are still asking me, what do I write in additional terms? You don't. You use paragraph addendum GG. The second thing to remember is, as you're searching the addendum boxes, AA, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X, AA, B, all those, FF and GG are not in there yet. So you need to, check other and write in addendum FF or addendum GG. So it's a little more confusing until they update the FAR contracts. Right. So that's the thing. So this says this contract is contingent upon within a period of days that blank left 3. If the compensation herein is not executed and delivered within the time period, then the buyer within 3 days thereafter may have written notice to sale terminating the contract. So you gave yourself a contingency and say, if you don't agree, if you don't tell me how you're paying me, I have the right to walk away. And then we're still covered. Why? Because we have a BBA.
Yeah.
The buyer's got to pay us, and the buyer's fine paying us. They're going to make it a condition of their offer. And that's that. So if you don't have a showing agreement, you don't want to write anything into additional terms. You want to use addendum GG, right? But you got to know who's paying who. Is it seller's broker or seller paying us as a buyer's agent? Now, what I would like you to do on our side as the listing side is share our compensation agreement with every buyer's agent that calls. It just makes it so much easier, but people aren't playing that game, right? So it's our job again to clean up the industry. So that's GG. That's the one that says, what are you offering me? And you really need to know this. If they come back and say, my seller's offering 0 compensation, then you can cancel because, or your buyer can pay you 3% of whatever your BBA says, or you got to renegotiate your offer and ask the seller to pay you. But why go through this step? We could have solved the problem with the compensation agreement up front. All right. So that's GG. This should be in your arsenal and you should be very familiar with it. Know how to find it. It's really simple. So go to templates, go to all documents, type in GG, pops right up. And then FF, this is if it was done right, right? And you know that your BBA says your buyer wants to pay you 3%, but the seller is only offering 1, right? I don't want to get into writing all this complicated language and additional terms and how this is going to happen. So FAR did it for us. It says buyer, excuse me, buyer has entered into a separate brokerage agreement as may be amended, a buyer broker agreement, which is not incorporated here in this this reference. It means the seller has no right to see it with Century 21, in this case, if we're the buyer's agent. At closing, seller agrees to credit buyer the sum or sums described below, which for disclosure purposes only the parties agree is related to the buyer's obligation under the buyer broker agreement to pay all or a portion of buyer broker's compensation. So what are we asking for? Oh, you found it, huh? I've been throwing treats on the floor and I hid one behind, I didn't hit it. It slid behind her mat and she's finding, she's trying to get it now. Okay, so BBA says we get 3%, sellers are offering 1. So we've already got a compensation agreement that says we're getting 1. So this would be an addendum to the contract saying, we want another 2 from you, Mr. Seller.
Right.
Or another flat dollar amount, or a percent of the purchase price plus something, right? In the event the credit described above exceeds the amount allowed by the buyer's lender for such contributions, then to the extent permitted by buyer's lender, if no box is checked, then the balance of the credit will be paid by seller directly to buyer broker. Interesting. And the balance of the credit will be paid by seller directly to buyer broker, or the credit will be reduced to the maximum amount of buyer's lender. So if they wanted to credit the buyer broker, what's the buyer broker allowed to do with a party to the contract? Buyer's broker is allowed to share their compensation with the party to the contract so long as all parties are disclosed. And how do you disclose all parties? You put it on the HUD. So let's say they gave us more than we're allowed to get. And then we say we're going to credit the buyer X amount of dollars for closing costs. And we can do that legally and it's disclosed. This rider FF shall not modify the buyer broker agreement or any other compensation agreement made between seller, broker, seller, buyer, seller broker, and buyer broker. Nothing in this rider requires the buyer or buyer broker to provide a copy of the buyer broker agreement. Because that's happening out there too. Buyer brokers say, I need a copy of your BBA. No, you don't. I need a copy of your listing agreement. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Those are our contracts. They're whatever the word is for us. They're between us. They're private between us. So that's it. So, and then of course the buyer broker we talked about. I would be interested to hear from you guys in the chat. How many of you are still having challenges getting BBAs, or how many of you feel real comfortable and are happy that you're getting 3% most of the time? And how many of you are asking for, give me your standards. What's your standard request? I want 3% and 60 days. I want 2.5% in 45 days. Give me some ideas of what your standards are.
Well, I can tell you personally, I've been writing them for 3 months and then doing 3%. Haven't had an issue with it yet. And what I've found is since we started doing the BBAs, is that more sellers are offering 3% than ever before in this area. It used to be 2 and maybe 2.5, just a sprinkle of 3s. And like the last few that I went under contract, I'd call and they go, yeah, we're doing 3%. I'm like, oh wow, this is a change.
Yes, that's what we're seeing too. It's wonderful. John says, went under contract about 20 days ago with an addendum FF because the agent did not have anything to send me at a full 3%. About 4 days before closing, she sends me with a different commission amount. Confirmed. With Chris, do not sign, need to be aware of what each addendum says. Yeah, you got to make sure you know what FF and GG are for. FF is a credit. You're asking the seller to credit the buyer the money to pay their agent because the buyer agreed to pay you more than the seller's offering. That's where FF comes in. GG is when they have no idea what the compensation agreement is and you're asking for it. And it's a condition of the offer. So if it gets countered, the buyer can say, sorry, I'm going to another house. Also, homeowners not offering compensation requires me to ask it in the contract. Correct. So that's where you use GG again, right? Seller's agreement to pay buyer broker's commission. But you got to know, are you asking the seller to pay you or the seller's broker to pay you? And you got to know what the listing agreement says to have it done right. Lauren says, I'm getting 3% in 90 days, no issues. I just want you guys to hear this. Herlon said, I'm happy. I've been getting 2.5 to 3% every time. John says, I have 3% a year. If buyer has an issue, I agree with them and drop to 6 months. Perfect. And I always like what Chris says. All right, do me a year and I'll give you the right to cancel at 6 months. Right? Or 3 months or 4 months, whatever you want, but get the year. Mike Clayman, 3% for 3 months. You guys are awesome. I got one signed at 3% for 6 months. Great, Nicola. 3% a year. Even better, Lauren. Ooh, good question. I don't know what it's named right now. I think it's just a FEMA disclosure or a flood insurance notice. I'll look with you for a second. I like being in control of my paycheck. That's the mindset we wanted you guys to come up with. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. And you hear all the pundits going, oh, well, real estate agents are going to be a thing in the past. They're going to make less money. They're going to do, I'm like, dude, if you do it right, you're going to make more money.
Mm-hmm. So let's just type into the search box FEMA. No, it might not be in .loop yet. Whenever you get stuck and you can't find something, everything is in Florida interactive forms. So sometimes I'll search there first until I can find it. There's nothing in FEMA. Flood disclosures. That's the one updated September 23rd. Flood disclosure. This is one that I think is so stupid. Seller has or has not filed a claim. Seller has or has not received federal assistance. And then it defines what flooding is. Not once does it ask if the house ever flooded. Because right now, if it asks me if my house is flooded, I have to say yes. But under this, I don't, because I've never filed a claim and I've not received any federal assistance.
Wow.
It's just, I can't believe that a group of brokers sat around a table and this is the best they could come up with. Kind of irritates me. And I called Juana. Mm-hmm. Yep, I love it. All right, it's a little bit over. I had a handyman coming in 5 minutes. I got about 6 more items to take care of, and then my house is almost back to normal. And they're minor, but I don't have time to do them. So, Mike, thank you. It's a pleasure working with you today. Good stories. Guys, I hope you picked up something from this today, and really appreciate your attendance and showing up. Happy Friday. Be safe this weekend. And remember, people are buying and selling houses every day.
Mm-hmm.
They really are. Hurricane, no hurricane. People that lost their houses. And I'm telling you right now, wait until this insurance shit gets figured out. People start getting checks. It's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen. So, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.